Hey everyone, welcome back. I have a pretty special video for you guys today. I'm going to go over my first ever official over-the-board game. I have never played officially a US Chess Federation game, so I'm officially unrated. I was very busy the last several months, so I haven't really been playing a lot of chess. I don't think my form is really at top level right now, but this is really something I really wanted to do. So I went and I signed up for the local chess club here in San Diego, and I started playing in a tournament, my first ever tournament. So there's a couple of differences between, I think, over-the-board play and online play, and I'd like to talk a little bit about it. I think the first thing that I noticed is that there's like a really cool energy in the room when everybody's in this room playing chess together. People are walking around in the middle of their games and kind of observing what's going on. And the energy was really fascinating to me. I think I was more engaged and I was having a lot more fun playing there than I actually really thought I was going to have, which was great. Um, because there's so many people there that love chess, like you find yourself really talking a lot to the people about the games that are going on or what happened in the previous games. And I find that like bouncing ideas off people is really one of the best ways to kind of grow your game and kind of improve. So that's also really great. Um, the other thing that I noticed, which is kind of obvious, I guess, now, is you get to kind of learn some of the players that are there, some of the people, how they play, their openings and things like that. So it's kind of different in terms of like, if I was just playing online, I'm going to play, my straight opening every single time. But when you play over the board, you get to know people and you kind of can prepare a little bit better, I think, for who you're playing, which is kind of another interesting layer to the whole thing. So that being said, I'm going to go over the game now. The other thing I can mention is that the tide control is very different in this, at least in this tournament, as to what I'm used to playing. I play 15-minute games, but at this tournament, it's actually 90 minutes with a 30-second increment per move. So you have way more time to think, which certainly can be a good thing, can also be a bad thing, definitely something to get used to. So we'll see how that unfolds as we get into the game. And as you will be able to see, this game was pretty tense back and forth. And I think I was perhaps a little bit nervous at the beginning of the game. And I was kind of picking up my play a little bit as the game went on. So I was playing with the white pieces here. And I started with e4. And my opponent right off the bat played d5, which is the Scandinavian defense, which is something I'm also not really used to seeing. Although I know some of the basic opening moves here. So white here always takes on d5, or usually takes on d5, and black brings the queen into the game very early. And the move here for white is always to play knight to c3, which is attacking the queen and developing at the same time. Typically, black is going to retreat the queen either to d8 or they're going to actually go to a5. I usually see a5 whenever I do see the Scandinavian, and that's what my opponent played here. So I played d4, which is pretty standard, and we, developed our pieces for a while. My opponent played bishop g4, and I played bishop d2 here. And I like to play this in the Scandinavian, obviously, because it does uncover an attack, or it x-rays the bishop attacking your opponent's queen. So it's always like a tactical thing to consider when you're playing here. My opponent played c6, and I played h3, attacking the bishop. And usually when you do a move like this, you're going to see the bishop retreat somewhere. But my opponent here actually just grabbed the bishop on the knight on f3, which I was a little bit surprised by. I think this is somewhat good for white to keep the bishop pair here and remove that tension of the pin that my opponent had. Okay, so my opponent played d7. I played bishop d3, just finishing off my development here. And my opponent castled queenside. And you might see on the eval bar to the left here, white has a little bit of advantage here. And the reason, which I did not spot, is you can move the knight here to e4, obviously uncovering the attack on the queen. And the point is, after the queen moves, you're not going to capture the knight here, but you're actually going to play knight to g5. And what this does is put pressure on the f7 pawn. And there's actually no way for black to defend this pawn. And obviously, if they don't move their rooks, you're going to be forking, potentially winning one of the rooks here. But I did not see that move. And I think in the beginning part of this game, one of my issues was I wanted to uncover an attack. I wanted to move this knight to uncover tactics, but I didn't really see, or I didn't really pull the trigger on it when I really should have been a couple moves. So I instead just castled short here. My opponent played e5, and this is kind of an interesting move, and I was thinking for a while here, and I really, actually, my first gut instinct was to play knight to e4, kind of like what we were just talking about. So the knight's going to jump here, and it's going to be defending the bishop at the same time. But I really, for some reason, really wanted to capture this pawn with my pawn on the d file. I know that didn't look good to me, but I did it anyway, and I did it because I felt like it was going to open up a lot of avenues for my bishops and my queen to kind of attack the king. And I was trying to calculate. I didn't really see anything in particular, but I did it anyway. And I think that's one of the first lessons to be learned from this is when you have a gut instinct here to play knight e4, you shouldn't change that based on like nebulous thinking of, oh, look, I might be able to attack the king here with some of my bishops, because it turned out it was kind of, an empty attack in the end. So I grabbed the pawn. The reason it doesn't look good on the face of it is because black's going to jump forward with their knight, attacking the queen, forcing the queen to move, also attacking the bishop, opening up the rook here. So here I played queen to f5, check. I wanted to get my queen out of the attack of the knight, and I thought that this was the best way to do that. So I thought that my opponent was going to move probably this knight backwards here to kind of block it, but instead she moved it to b8. And here I got a little bit carried away. I played bishop to f4, and this is a decent move. I got carried away with the idea that this knight is pinned. Not only is this knight pinned to the king, obviously, but it's also kind of pinned because I'm attacking the queen here as well. And I thought I could start piling up attackers on the knight here on e5. Now the issue is I didn't really fully think about the moves that my opponent could make in this position. For example, how easy it would be to simply just defend this knight. So my opponent just went ahead and played bishop d6, an easy developing move and also kind of cutting off this pin. So I played rook to d1, centralizing the rooks. My opponent added another defender to the knight here that was pinned. And I played a bishop to g5. So I'm kind of moving the bishop quite a couple times early on in this game here. And I kind of gave up, I guess, on piling up pressure here. And I thought that this would be a great move because I've got two attackers and only one defender. I didn't think it would be easy for black to deal with this, and on top of that, I thought maybe I could grab this knight and win the pawn here. Completely overlooking another good defensive move that my opponent made, which was just rook to e6 defending, adding a defender here. So, as you can see, I can still grab this knight, and I can still win this pawn in the corner. But for some reason, even though that was my plan, I decided to play rook to e1 first anyway, which kind of slows this game down. It's really a move that I couldn't really afford here if I wanted to keep up the pressure. So here my opponent played h6. And now you can see that even if I capture this knight, well, obviously this pawn isn't hanging anymore. And this pawn's now really putting a question to my bishop. And I started to get a little bit worried here because if I move my bishop back, my opponent can play g6, they can play g5, attacking the bishop some more. And I was really kind of worrying about my queen a little bit because these knights are cutting off a lot of squares for my queen to go to. I was kind of worrying that she was going to get trapped pretty soon. If I could always go to f4, but that's going to open up an extra on my queen from the bishop here. So I started to get worried, and I thought maybe I got a little bit ahead of myself with these pieces out in the front here, so far forward. So begrudgingly, I decided to trade the bishop, even though I didn't really want to. And obviously, this is going to open up an attack on my queen with the rook here. And I probably made one of my most questionable moves of the game here. I played queen to h7. And I thought that, I thought it was odd, and it was not my first instinct to play here, because the queen is so far out of the middle of the board. It's kind of, just wayward at this point. But I thought, okay, I'm going to be attacking this pawn. Maybe my opponent is simply going to retreat the bishop here. And I always have this diagonal to retreat to, especially with this bishop. But I failed to, again, see my opponent's possible moves here. So after I played queen to h7, my opponent grabbed the pawn, the bishop here on d3, sorry, cutting off his diagonal already. And after I recaptured, my opponent played a really nice move that made me question my queen positioning. So if you want, you can pause the video here. Think about what move you would play with black in this position, and you can see if my opponent had the same idea as you. Okay, so the move that my opponent played was rook to g6. So at this point, I did not show it on my face, but I was very concerned with the fact that my queen was here. My queen was totally trapped. There's not an easy way, luckily, for my opponent to win the queen here, but my queen can't go anywhere. She can't go here, obviously, and this whole file is cut off by my opponent's rook. So I panicked a little bit, and I said, okay, I need to get this queen free as soon as possible. So I played rook to e3. My plan was to kind of jump up here with the rook, either having him take here and trading, or maybe moving the rook over to this square and basically freeing my queen. But my opponent played another very good move here, which is queen to g5. And now I can't really worry so much about just keep getting my queen back in this position. I have to worry about checkmate, obviously. So I played g3, and then hopefully thought about freeing my queen after this move. So after g3, my opponent played another really good attacking move, which was bishop to c5. So obviously attacking the rook here. And it's getting a little bit dangerous for me, but there was a move that jumped out in my mind immediately after I saw this. And that was jumping my knight here to kind of fork these two pieces. Obviously, if my opponent just takes the rook here, well, I can grab the queen. But immediately after playing this move, I did see a tactic for black. A queen move for black that would basically end the game for me. And I really thought that the game was over at this point, because obviously playing this knight move, I'm already tempting black to really move the queen, obviously. And there aren't that many places really that the queen can go to. Obviously, she wants to remain connected to the bishop in case I capture the bishop. But the move here for black really is to play queen to f5. And why queen to f5 is so good is that if queen goes to f5 here, let's just do it. These queens were looking at each other at this point, and black's got this rook facing my king. So let's say I go ahead and just capture the bishop here now. Well, black can actually take the pawn on g3, checking my king, and once I recapture it, I lose the queen. So I saw this move and I was very worried about queen to f5. And my opponent was ominously hanging her queen over the square during the game. And I thought, okay, it's all over. But she ended up playing queen to d5 here instead. And in my jubilation of avoiding losing this game, I immediately grabbed the bishop. But there was a much better move here that could have been made by me. And that move was rook to d3. Now, obviously, I'm attacking the queen. And if the queen moves away, well, the rook is hanging here. So the best that black can do actually is block with the bishop and then basically give up the bishop in this position. But because I was so happy that they didn't play queen f5, I just went ahead and grabbed the bishop. And I think that's another interesting difference between over the board and online, because I was feeling so much pressure here in this over the board game. Pressure that I really wouldn't have been feeling if I was just playing online. And I think that the release of that pressure kind of led to me missing this opportunity with my rook, which is kind of fascinating. It's interesting to think about the differences in online and over the board chess. But anyways, I captured the bishop because I needed to relieve some of this tension here. And after my opponent grabbed the piece back, I just went ahead and played c3. Opponent played a5. And now I'm still really in an uncomfortable position here. Obviously, my queen is still trapped. And the only good thing about this is that my opponent's kind of using two rooks to kind of trap the queen. So obviously, this rook has to stay on the back rank, otherwise I can escape. And this rook really kind of has to stay on g6, otherwise my queen does have this diagonal at least. But it's still uncomfortable, and I really wanted to play the rook back to e8 here. But if I do that, what was really the issue that I noticed is that that's opening up this pin for my f2 pawn. So if I move this rook, this f2 pawn is pinned, and the game falls apart completely here for me. because this rook can take with check now. I can't retake, and once I move, like this queen is coming in, it's just lights out. So thankfully I spotted that too, and it was just uncomfortable because there aren't that many moves to make here. So I went ahead and played f3, rook to f3. I wanted to defend this pawn, and also put some pressure here in the f7 pawn of my opponent. But I really felt like I needed to start doing something, aggressive here. Otherwise, I'm just going to lose the game. So rook f3 was played, and my opponent played another good move, queen to d5. She's double attacking my hanging rook and also this undefended pawn on a2. But I was more than willing to give this pawn up to get some attacking chances here. So I moved my king forward to defend the rook, and she just went ahead and grabbed the pawn, and I played rook to e7, excuse me, finally getting this rook into the game, really, and putting some more pressure on this f7 pawn, and we'll see how this goes from here. So my opponent played rook to f8, defending also with the queen, but this does open up a little tactic here for me. So if you want, again, you can pause the video and see if you can figure out the move that I played here, which is, it's not the only move, but it does allow me to kind of break some of the tension here and get on the offensive. So if you'd like, pause the video and I'll show you the move in 1 second. Okay, the move is queen captures on g6, finally getting the queen out of there. So the point is, I'm capturing the rook here, and if my opponent recaptures the queen, which she does, then this rook is also hanging here. So I end up taking the rook, and basically I'm trading the queen for the 2 rooks here, plus I guess this pawn on a2. So we're in a position where I've got 2 rooks and my opponent has the queen. And usually this is pretty good for the player with the 2 rooks. 2 pieces are usually better than 1. If the rooks are able to kind of move freely throughout the board and they're connected, then it's usually pretty good for the rooks. But I was very worried about the passed pawn here, and that's something that I don't have and my opponent does have, and that makes this game very precarious for me. So I actually spent the most time in the entire game after my opponent moved her king out of the way. I spent so much time here because I could not figure out what to do with my rooks. I felt that this b2 pawn was crucial because my opponent had these 3 pawns that were going to march down the board, and once this pawn goes, it's very easy to envision this pawn promoting. But I was also torn because I really wanted to maintain, the attack, the offensive here. And I thought that this was super passive. And I thought about doubling the rooks here, but especially this move. But I didn't like it because once the queen captures here, this queen is defending the square, and we can't trade here. I mean, it might look like an okay trade, but this pawn is now going to promote easily. My king is way too far away, and the game's over. So I didn't see the benefit here. So instead, I just grabbed the pawn on g7. Okay, my opponent grabs the pawn on b2. Now this is really paving the way for the pawn. And I grabbed another pawn. Okay, my opponent played a4. Now it's really getting to crunch time here. So I double up the rooks on the back rank. And my opponent played b5, another good move here. We've got a really scary looking pawn chain marching down the board, and I am concerned. So I feel like I really need to attack the king and put on some pressure. So I played rook to a8 check. My opponent goes to b6. And I played a little bit of a tricky move here. I played c4. If you think about it a little bit, it's not hard to understand the dynamics behind this or the tactics behind this move, but I'm sure that many opponents might just grab this pawn here. So let's see what happens. If my opponent grabs the pawn, then this allows me to skewer the king and the queen, winning the queen and essentially this game. The game would be over now. So obviously my opponent didn't do that, but also if my opponent simply pushed the pawn, well then I could grab this pawn on a4, and I'm already feeling a lot better about the position at this point. So I was hoping my opponent would do one of those 2 things, but she instead just went ahead and played king to c5, avoiding that. So we traded pawns here, and now I played rook to a5, kind of setting up a little bit of a potential tactic here. So my opponent played king to b6, and I think the point here, it kind of makes sense. It's a reasonable move because you're basically forcing either the rook to retreat all the way back, so, going back to where I started, or you're forcing white to play rook to a8, doubling up the rooks here, which is fine, but these rooks become very passive at that point, which is really not what we want. However, there is another move that white could play here, and that move is rook captures on a4. So again, the point here is if black recaptures, then I have, again, this skewer. So I guess part of the story of the ending of this game here was this queen wasn't really ideally placed on the b-file, and a lot of that has to do with the king. Yes, she is pinning my pawn here, but this queen really ended up being in a bad position here on b2, and I think that kind of cost the game. So I grabbed the pawn on a4. My opponent realized that this rook could not be captured, and at this point, I'm feeling like I'm winning. With two rooks, this pawn should never promote, and at the worst case trade for me is going to be a pawn and a queen for the two rooks. So I'm feeling pretty good, and if that trade occurs, I've got these three connected pawns here and only one opposing pawn on the other side. So I was feeling very good. I retreated the rook backwards. b4 was played, and I wanted to just stick a rook here to defend. But now my opponent played queen to d4. She wanted to kind of centralize the queen, make room for this pawn at least to promote. But this move ended the game abruptly. And for the last time in the video, if you'd like, you can pause it, and you can see if you can figure out the move for white here to end the game. Okay, so the correct move was rook to c8, because this king is cut off from going this way, and obviously the pawn here is preventing the king to go here, so this is going to force the king to align itself with the queen. And after this, it would be as simple as playing rook here, capturing, and at this point, obviously the game would be over. So my opponent resigned after I played rook to c8. It did start out a little bit poorly for me, but I thought this was a really interesting game, an interesting end game, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to playing some more of these over-the-board games and breaking them down for you guys. So I hope you enjoy this, and I'll see you next time.